Living with a monster, victims tell their stories. Before you go, subscribe for more gripping crime stories, like for answers, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into true crime together. It started with a frantic 911 call from a small Austrian town in 2008. A trembling young woman, pale and disoriented, had appeared at a hospital claiming she had just escaped from a basement, one she'd been trapped in for 24 years. Her name was Elizabeth Fritzl. Investigators could hardly believe her words. But when they raided the quiet suburban home of Joseph Fritzl, a 73-year-old electrical engineer known as a devoted father and husband, what they found beneath the ground shook the world. Behind the steel doors of his basement, police uncovered a maze of narrow tunnels and hidden rooms, soundproof, damp, and reeking of years of imprisonment. Inside were Elizabeth's children, some born in captivity, faces pale from lack of sunlight, eyes wide from fear and confusion. Upstairs, Joseph's wife, Rosemarie, stood in disbelief, insisting she had no idea her husband had been keeping their daughter locked below their feet. For decades, she thought Elizabeth had run away to join a cult. The truth was far more horrifying. Authorities pieced together the unimaginable. In 1984, when Elizabeth was just 18, her father had drugged her and dragged her into the basement he'd built under their home in Amstetten, Austria. There, he locked her behind reinforced concrete doors and began a nightmare that lasted nearly a quarter of a century. Joseph presented himself to the world as a hard-working retiree, while below, he controlled every second of Elizabeth's life. He visited daily, bringing food and inflicting terror. For years, neighbors saw nothing suspicious. To them, Joseph was quiet but respectable. He hosted family barbecues, smiled at passers-by, and even volunteered advice on home repairs. No one ever questioned why the lower part of his house was always locked, or why strange sounds were sometimes heard at night. It wasn't until one of the hidden children, Kirsten, fell critically ill that Elizabeth begged Joseph to take her to the hospital. His decision to finally allow it would be his undoing. When doctors questioned why a 19-year-old girl looked so malnourished and terrified, and why no record of her existence existed, the walls of Joseph's secret life began to crumble. Elizabeth seized her moment, slipped a note to hospital staff, and revealed her name. Within hours, police surrounded the Fritzl home. What they found beneath that innocent suburban house would haunt Austria forever. But when investigators opened one final locked chamber deeper in the basement, they realized the horror wasn't over. There was something else hidden there, something that changed everything they thought they knew about Joseph Fritzl. As detectives descended the final narrow staircase beneath the Fritzl home, the stale air thickened. The deeper they went, the more it felt like stepping into another world, one built on fear and obsession. The walls were covered in mildew, the smell of decay and human confinement choking the officers' lungs. At the very end of the corridor stood a steel door, unlike the others, sealed tight, reinforced with bolts that only Joseph himself had the key for. When they forced it open, silence fell. Inside, investigators found an empty cot, a rusted sink, and a notebook filled with Joseph's twisted notes, records of every year Elizabeth had been locked away, every rule she was forced to obey, and every child she had borne. It wasn't just a basement, it was a cell block of control. When confronted, Joseph tried to maintain his calm, insisting at first that everything was a family matter, but under the pressure of hours-long interrogation, his facade cracked. He confessed, emotionless, to building the basement in the 1980s specifically to trap his daughter. He told police how he had designed it so no one could hear her screams, how he had built fake walls and used heavy insulation to hide any sound. He spoke with such detachment that even seasoned officers left the room in disbelief. Joseph had not just been hiding a secret, he had engineered an entire underground world for it. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was being interviewed at a secured hospital ward, reunited with the children she had raised in darkness. For the first time in decades, she saw the sky. Her voice trembled as she described her captivity, the years of beatings, the constant fear, the silence that became her prison. She had tried to escape twice, only to be punished so severely that she stopped trying. Her story horrified Austria, a modern country suddenly forced to confront the reality that evil could live quietly next door. Forensic experts spent days mapping the underground dungeon, finding hidden compartments and false ceilings where Joseph stored tools, old documents, and videotapes. On one of them, he had recorded himself working in the basement, smiling, humming, as though it were just another home project. Every detail made the story darker. The world now knew Joseph Fritzl not as a family man, but as one of the most monstrous criminals in modern history. And just when investigators thought they'd uncovered all his secrets, a new revelation surfaced. A second property miles away, connected to Joseph's name. There were rumors of another hidden space there. Police prepared to search it, fearing they were about to discover that Elizabeth wasn't his only victim. When police reached the second property, a quiet, overgrown house on the outskirts of Amstetten, the tension was suffocating. Locals watched in disbelief as investigators sealed off the area. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, it felt frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture, old photographs of the Fritzl family, and a thick silence that made every creak sound sinister. Then, in the back of the property, behind a false wall in the cellar, they found something chilling, a small, half-built chamber, eerily similar to the one beneath Joseph's home. It was unfinished, but unmistakably designed for captivity. The discovery confirmed investigators' worst fears. Joseph had been planning to do it again. When confronted with this evidence, Joseph's calm demeanor finally cracked. In a trembling voice, he admitted that he had begun building the second dungeon after Elizabeth's youngest child was born, just in case something happened to the first one, he said. The sheer coldness of his reasoning shocked even the most hardened officers. Psychologists later described Joseph as a predatory narcissist, obsessed with control to the point of godlike delusion. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a man running his own world, one where his victims existed solely to obey him. In court, Elizabeth faced her father for the first time in open daylight. The tension was unbearable, years of buried trauma colliding with the man who had stolen her life. She refused to look away. Every word she spoke, about the abuse, the lies, the isolation, carried the weight of unimaginable endurance. The jury wept. Reporters wrote that the courtroom itself felt haunted. And when Joseph finally stood to speak, his words were hollow. A man trapped in the ruins of his own monstrosity. The sentence was inevitable, life imprisonment without parole. But the story didn't end with the trial. For Austria and for the world, the case became a dark mirror, a reminder that horror can live in plain sight, behind smiling faces and locked doors. Elizabeth and her children began their slow journey toward healing, shielded by anonymity and therapy. She once said, "We survived the dar, Ness. Now we're learning to live in the light." And yet even now, the image of that basement, the flickering bulb, the narrow walls, the years stolen, lingers in the minds of everyone who heard her story. Because living with a monster wasn't just a headline, it was a warning that sometimes the greatest danger isn't a stranger in the dark, but the person sitting right across the dinner table,